Good evening and welcome to the Evergrey and Civic Commons So You Voted Now What event. Tonight we have a great panel for you talking all about diving deep into civic engagement. For those who don't know the Evergrey, we're a daily newsletter that helps curious Seattleites connect with their city and with each other. This month we are partnering with Civic Commons to help folks take their civic engagement to the next level. Civic engagement has been a really big part of what the Evergrey has been all about from day one. But a recent reader survey we did made clear that there's still a bit of a disconnect for many Seattleites and their government. The survey that we conducted, out of 134 responses, only 16% of folks said they understood local government very well. 17% said not well, and 2/3 said fairly well, which we defined as, I know who some of my representatives are, but I don't completely understand their responsibilities. So tonight we brought some of those representatives here together and some city leaders. And we're hoping to bridge that gap and demystify some of what goes on in our local government. And with that, I'll kick it over to Frank Naum from Civic Commons.
Thanks, Caitlin. So really excited about tonight's event to have the panels that we do have. We're really lucky to have you all, as I know you're all very busy. So Civic Commons is really a joint venture social engagement organization spun off by the Seattle Foundation. And we are a small team working with business leaders, civic leaders, community groups, private business folks as well, to just really change the narrative of our region or help shape the narrative of our region towards one of shared prosperity and one of belonging. And so we really love this opportunity to engage with folks in government, our electeds and our departments. Just think about, how we engage, why don't we engage, and ask some questions to really smart, wonderful people here. So to start, I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves, and we're going to start small. So we're going to start from city, then we're going to go to the county, and then we're going to actually go to the federal. And so I would love to hear from you all. Feel free to introduce yourself however you would like to. So go ahead, Andrés.
Well, thank you, Frank, and thanks to the Evergrey and the Civic Commons. My name is Andrés Mantilla. I am the director of the Seattle Department of Neighborhoods. And thank you for letting me be part of this call. And I think we're answering the questions around one of the icebreakers. One of the reasons why I come to this role is really with a deep passion and respect for the community and those that have come before me, some of which are here on this call, but really passionate about bringing emerging engagement to outcomes for the communities that we're trying to serve. And so I come at it with a deep level of service and respect and commitment to the city, and really passionate about trying different types of engagement of how we can engage our most vulnerable. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. And thank you for also reminding me that I skipped over the question, which is, why do you serve in the government role that you serve in? Like, what brought you into public service? So thank you, Andrés, for answering that question. Girmay, you're next.
Thanks so much, Frank. Thank you all for having me on here. I'm Girmay Zahilay. I'm a King County council member representing King County District 2. And King County District 2 is actually the district where I grew up. Like Frank, I think you're also a Franklin Quaker, is that right? Yeah, okay. All right, I think you said yes. I graduated from Franklin. I grew up in places like Rainier Vista, Holly Park, Skyway, and I grew up in a single parent home with a mother who was working as a nursing assistant. Very low wage job, but also a very laborious job that really requires you to lift heavy objects and work long hours just to meet basic needs. And as I grew up, I had to see her struggle to just pay for basic things like rent, even though she worked 2 or 3 jobs at a time. And it would be one thing if those kind of jobs helped you climb the economic ladder over time. The American dream, when you come here as an immigrant, you expect that if you work really hard, you and your family will do better and better, and your kids will go on and do better than you did. But the opposite happened with my mom. She worked so much that she actually ended up blowing out both of her knees and can't work anymore. And that's the story that I see all around the region that I grew up in. People are working harder and harder and getting less and less out of it, to the point where many of the communities that I grew up around in South Seattle are no longer there. They've been pushed out. They've been displaced out of the city limits into places like Skyway and Federal Way, and even down to Pierce County, out of King County altogether. And so my goal with running for a regional office is to address regional problems with regional solutions, things like displacement, affordable housing, climate action. I think there's a lot of room for huge, bold solutions at the King County level, and I'm excited to be part of that.
Thank you so much, Girmay. And just for the listeners, I am not a Franklin Quaker alum, but I did coach there for 7 years. So I don't want to represent in a way that is not true. But I do bleed gold and black. So thank you so much, Girmay. And Congresswoman Jayapal, please go ahead.
Thank you, Frank. And it's really great to be with you all and with my really good friends, Andrés, Mantilla, and Councilmember Zahilay. And I just have to say, I'm a Garfield mom. So watch what you say, Franklin Quakers. But I'm an immigrant myself. I came to the United States when I was 16 years old by myself. My parents had about $5,000 in their bank account, and they used all of it to send me here alone. Because they felt like this was the place I was going to have the best education and best opportunity. And, I think about that sacrifice that they made every single day. I am a mom myself, and I remember when my kid turned 16, trying to think about what that meant. And so I, like Girmay, also feel like a lot of why I ran for office was what shaped me before. I was an activist and an organizer. I started what is the largest immigrant advocacy organization in Washington State, called One America, right after 9/11. And I honestly, we're talking about civic engagement. I had no idea really how politics worked. I just knew there were things that were wrong and that somebody needed to work to fix them. And so I got involved in that and ended up building this immigrant rights organization. And then had a theory of change after 12 years of doing that, and being somewhat dismissive, can I say, of elected officials, people in public office. I didn't really believe that it made much difference who our elected officials were. And I realized I was wrong about that. And I had this theory of change that if we ran ourselves as organizers and won, and were sitting at the table and could actually make the kinds of policy decisions and legislative decisions and lift up the stories of people who don't have their voices heard, that we could actually make a difference. And so I ran first for the state Senate, represented many of those areas in South Seattle and Skyway and the 37th district, did that for 2 years, and then ran for Congress. And now I'm serving my third term as the US representative for the 7th Congressional District. And it's really an honor. I'm the first person of color that Democrats in Washington State have ever sent to Congress. I'm one of only 14 immigrants to serve in the United States Congress. And I'm the first South Asian American woman to serve in the United States House of Representatives.
Thank you for that, Congresswoman, and thanks to all our panelists for introducing themselves and for being here. Congresswoman, I was going to kick off the main questions with you, and you really gave us a nice segue, because you were talking about not really trusting local officials, or not thinking that politics perhaps would make a difference in your own life. And the first question was going to be about that. What would you say to someone who has lost trust in the government and does not think their voice will be heard amid all the shouting that's happening right now? Why is it important to participate? And thinking particularly about the national stage and the deep division that's gone on for the past several years, and that unfortunately has continued in many ways in recent weeks.
Yeah, I think that if anything, what happened on January 6th, what's been happening over the last 4 years, just puts a finer point on why it is so important for us to be engaged. When you look at what happened in Georgia, it was Black women, brown folks, Indigenous folks in Georgia, in Arizona, in places across the country that got engaged many times for the first time, because they felt that the last president and all of the Senate, the Republican Senate, was not giving them what they wanted, and they got engaged and actually changed the way democracy works. And that is what I found as an activist as well. You know, when I started, I was skeptical, but what I realized is that we were able to run the largest voter registration drive in the history of the state. We registered 25,000 new American citizens to vote. And all of a sudden, things started to change. People looked at us differently in the immigrant community and said, you know what, we need to start a citizenship initiative. We need to start an Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs. We need to protect driver's licenses for immigrants. That's what's happening at the federal level now, too. We've taken over as Democrats the House, the Senate, and the White House. But most importantly, we are putting forward bold proposals that benefit Democrats, Republicans, and independents. Things like a $15 minimum wage that had its origins right here in Seattle that will lift, if we raise the federal minimum wage to 15, it will lift 30 million people up and give a raise to 30 million people and lift 1 million people out of poverty. So my advice to anybody who thinks that change, you know, that their voice isn't important, is to look at all the people throughout the course of history, going back to Sojourner Truth and now to immigrant activists or $15 minimum wage activists, fast food workers who actually got engaged, or Black women in Georgia who delivered the state for this president, and to see that your voice is so important. In fact, there is nothing else that can transform and make change in politics other than the voice of the people speaking for democracy.
Thank you. Andrés, Girmay, care to chime in with perhaps more of a local or county perspective?
You know, that's so well said. I think that one thing that stands out to me in the, you know, engagement day in day of our residents, thousands of residents that are not just one thing. They're not just immigrants one day and workers the next day. They're everything all at once. And so trust is not something that's ever granted. It's earned, and you have to earn it every single day. And as policymakers and as local officials, we have to understand that every time that we break that trust, it's even that much harder to bring them back to the table. So, you know, we like to, at the Department of Neighborhoods, try to look at the comprehensive needs of that person, so that we are making sure that that we're addressing that whole individual, right? And so it's very inspiring to see the lessons of Georgia and the lessons across the country, and see that those examples aren't actually so far away. That's happening in our community right now. And it's just a matter of, at times, at government to get out of the way and let those voices be heard.
I agree with everything that I heard so far. You know, my lens for how I govern and what changes I want to make is who stands to benefit from the policies that I propose and who stands to be harmed by policies that are proposed. And that's always the people who are most beat down by our systems. How do we uplift low-income people, Black and brown people, people with disabilities? And I know that's the lens that Congresswoman Jayapal and Andrés bring too. And when we're talking about these demographics that government has let down so frequently, I don't blame them one bit for being pessimistic or for feeling like the government and our institutions in general don't work for them. They haven't for a long time, but all the examples that we just heard from the Congresswoman and from Andrés show us that if we have enough of a grassroots movement, anything is possible. Those communities that I mentioned don't have the most access to power, don't have the most money, but if we build multiracial coalitions and we stand up and we work together and we put pressure on the right places, anything is possible. And we saw that just this past year with the Black Lives Matter movement as a prime example. We saw millions of people stand up around the country, tens of thousands of people marching in the streets right here in King County in South Seattle. I grew up in the South End. I've never seen that many people packing the streets that way before. And policies that would have never been possible just a year ago were possible this year. We saw major structural changes to our institutions of policing. We saw massive investments going toward Black and brown neighborhoods that had been disinvested from for a long time. And so my answer to them is anything is possible. We just have to work together and put pressure on the right places.
Thank you so much to our panelists for those answers. And Girmay, I want to follow up with you with our next question, which is, in the Evergrey survey, 65% of our respondents said that lack of time and not really knowing where to start is a barrier to their civic engagement. And in my time, I also have worked at the Department of Neighborhoods in the past, and I know the adage of the squeaky wheel gets like the attention, but it's not just the squeaky wheel. It's really those who have access to power, those who know who to call, who have their representative or their lobbyist on their speed dial, usually get the most attention. And I know I lived in the Othello neighborhood, and I remember seeing the Black Lives Matter parade and like the march right in front of my window, and seeing just like droves and droves of people get on Sound Transit Link Light Rail and get off at our stop and just come into the park. And I see that, I know that you care a lot about improving access to all residents, but especially to residents that we grew up with, that we know in our communities. So how are you working to improve access to your office for folks from all backgrounds and not just those who have the loudest voice?
That's a great point, Frank. Yeah, the communities that you just mentioned aren't the ones that have the phone number of politicians that can just call up and say, hey, this is what I need, please get it for me now. So my office has really relied on non-traditional ways of reaching communities. And the answer is always meet people where they are. Don't just rely on the traditional ways of getting in front of people. I use social media a lot to reach younger generations. I know our younger generations are on places like Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and TikTok. I don't use TikTok yet, I'm not gonna lie, but I'm gonna learn how to do it soon. But one thing that I found out is that a lot of younger generations in high school and middle school and college know about the work that we've been doing through my campaign. But there would be times where I go and talk to somebody in much older generations, and they're like, what have you done since you've been in office? Because they're not looking on social media, they're not reading The Stranger. So this year, one area that we've improved on is relying on mediums, again, that meet people where they are. So relying on smaller ethnic news media outlets, going on King 5 and TV news channels. People still watch those programs, and that's how you get in front of the broadest audiences. And lastly, some people have a digital divide. We still don't have digital equity in King County or maybe anywhere in the country. So we need to make sure that we're getting in front of people through community-based organizations and going door to door. So we've partnered up with organizations that serve specific neighborhoods, saying that, oh, we want to reach people in Rainier Vista or New Holly, for example. We have to partner up with organizations that serve them and literally walk door to door with those organizations to get in front of people. I've done that a few times through apartment complexes and public housing, and it's really the best way to get communities that aren't on the more traditional outlets.
Congresswoman Andrés, do you want to follow up with Girmay's response? Yeah, Congresswoman.
Yeah, I, have the benefit of a great outreach team in my office. And so they are just phenomenal, and they are everywhere. They're at community events. We host roundtables in our office with community advocates around specific topics. So we're always sure that we are bringing people to the table that we feel like we need to hear from, who don't typically have access. And we are on social media. The teletown halls that we do are also a great opportunity for people to engage, because we actually get a list of constituents who are in the district. They're not necessarily the people who have contacted us. We just do a call out to constituents, and we can get 10,000 people on a teletown hall that way. Which has been a really great way to engage. But I really agree with Councilmember Zahilay's point that, we're relying so much on technology in this COVID time. And I really miss the town halls and the constituent coffees that we used to do in neighborhoods in person, because we got a lot of folks who, we could go to a particular neighborhood where we knew there was a community of people who may not otherwise have access to us, and we would be able to be there in person, which is also really important in our communities of color. It's that personal engagement. So, we hope we can get back to doing those things. But for us, there is nothing really that starts without feedback from the community. And whether that's drafting a piece of legislation, my Dignity for Detained Immigrants bill, we spent 6 months working with groups around the country who are direct advocates for immigrant rights organizations, or the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights, same thing with domestic workers, immigrant workers, childcare workers from across the country to draft those bills. And I think that has been a really, really important piece of how we do the work. So everything we do, and I should say that our office gets the most mail, letters, emails, and phone calls of any district in the country, of any member of Congress in the country. So we have a super engaged constituency. And I think part of it is because I've always been clear that that's what I really want. That I want people to write to me. I want people to find me, and believe me, they do find me. I think everybody in the immigrant advocacy community does have my cell number from my 15 years of advocacy and organizing. So we're going to keep trying to get better at that every single day, and really grateful to people like Councilmember Zahilay, who are really the first touch for many folks at the local level, and also for Andrés with the Department of Neighborhoods, which has always been about organizing. The tradition of the Department of Neighborhoods in the city of Seattle has been about organizing in neighborhoods and getting people really engaged.
Yeah, I'll just add, Frank, as you know, in the department, you have to be so intentional of every single decision that you make, because if not, the system isn't going to correct itself to kind of reach those that are least likely to connect with city government. And so the way you have to do that is to solve for the person that is most disconnected. And the challenge for city government officials is really to design something that maybe you wouldn't even want to, something that's that's foreign to you in the way that you would engage, because that's likely how others are engaging, and specifically youth and through non-traditional means. The idea of meeting folks where they are is so important. It's so hard to do that in the digital divide, as was described. But what we've been trying to do in that is really organizing around shared experience and storytelling. People, especially now, want to really just feel connected, feel like a sense of belonging within their communities, however that's defined. And so we tend to push towards that, and through that have conversations that are about the things that we want to talk about, but really being able to connect as neighbors or as community members in that shared experience of being from South Seattle or going to Garfield or something along those lines. And and that's just the way that we have to tackle it in these days during the pandemic.
Thanks for that, everyone. And Andrés, you teed up an opportunity for the next question to go a little bit deeper on that and get a little more specific. I wanted to ask you, and the other panelists, feel free to chime in as well. Can you give an example of a recent policy or program change that took place because of resident or constituent input? So kind of pulling back the curtain a little bit and getting into, what's the process like when someone comes to you from the public and says, I have an idea or I have a concern. How does that lead to actual change?
Well, the example that stood out to me right away, which is one that each of the other panelists are very familiar with, was the recent example of the 2020 census. And not only was that happening in such a threatening environment with former President Trump making fear-mongering statements around citizenship and really alienating immigrants and the most vulnerable amongst us. But even before then, the challenge for us in the request and demand of community of us was to really approach the 2020 census in a much different way than we did in 2010. And through that, by looking at non-traditional ways of engagement, by investing in trusted relationships through trusted advocates and community coalitions that have the relationships, knowing that the government, especially in the census, is not the most trusted partner to carry forward. The city of Seattle was one of the top cities in response rates, over 60%. And really that is by, that wouldn't have happened without the partnership of members on this call, but also without the partnership of those same community members that really built those coalitions and asked us to do better. And so that was things like, small and simple things like better translation and interpretation, to more diverse ways of engaging through ethnic media, through going on Univision, in language outreach, to really looking comprehensively of how we complete a complete count, making sure that we are engaging with the homeless population and the unhoused, making sure that we're engaging with youth, and really building those partnerships and coalitions. And that absolutely would have not happened without community members coming and saying, you need to do better.
Thank you. And Congresswoman, it sounds like you're very familiar with that work as well. And you also just mentioned Domestic Workers Bill of Rights and Dignity for Detained Immigrants as two examples of policy change. So that was fueled by constituent input. So your choice of which one you want to pick apart there.
Well, I could bring a couple others too. The Access to Legal Counsel bill, which was my first bill I ever introduced into the House, and Kamala Harris, who was then Senator, now Vice President Kamala Harris, was my sponsor in the Senate. That came out of the Muslim ban and going to the airport and seeing people who didn't have attorneys and talking with attorneys and figuring out how do we make sure that people have the right to consult with an attorney. Same thing that happened up at the northern border with Iranian Americans. Apprenticeship Act that just passed the floor of the House. My piece of that bill was actually input that I got when I was a state senator about how we needed more pre-apprenticeships for folks of color and women who didn't have access to, often just didn't know about or weren't recruited for apprenticeships. And now we've taken that to a federal level, really successful program at the state level that came directly from constituents. And then a last one is Roadmap to Freedom, a resolution that I introduced around comprehensive immigration reform and what that should look like. That came directly from folks that I know, people who have been detained, deported, but also immigrants who are just contributing so much to our country, to our communities, and want to be seen and recognized for the powerful contributors that they are. So on top of the other two, I just gave you a few more. And that's the best part of the job, is to be able to respond with real policy solutions and legislative solutions.
Thank you. Councilmember Zahilay, I'm sure you have some examples as well.
Yeah, I'll give one. 2 years ago, a group of organizations that serve youth brought the teenagers together, and they asked them, what do you need? What is the best way that we can serve youth in South Seattle? And the young people said, honestly, the number one thing that we need is housing. We're getting gentrified, we're getting displaced out of South Seattle. And so whether we want to solve homelessness or crime or mental health, we need more housing that we can live in. We need a safe place to live in order to live safe lives. And so that coalition came to me and they said, we need to build housing and resources for our young people in the South End before they get displaced. And so I met with the King County assessor, and we worked together to identify underutilized publicly owned land. And we found some, and we worked with Sound Transit to potentially transfer vacant lots next to Sound Transit lines to community-based organizations to build something called the Youth Achievement Center. And the Youth Achievement Center is a housing and resource center for young people in South Seattle. And now we've, after a long email campaign and a grassroots campaign letting Sound Transit know that the community wants to do it, Sound Transit has agreed to transfer that land, and we're in the process of building the Youth Achievement Center. And again, that came from the concerns of young people, from youth saying we need a safe place to live in the South End. And I can tell a dozen stories of events that happened just like that.
That's awesome. Thanks everyone for that. Frank's got our last question for the panelists for our official agenda, but I'm also going to open the Q&A function. So people who are watching along at home, feel free to submit a question and we will move on to that next.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for all these responses to the questions, and just the way you all have also worked with each other and know of each other's work, which I think is really wonderful. A lot of times I think when people are in government, they kind of narrow in on the thing that they're doing, and we don't do enough of the coalition building. And I do want to shout out when you talked about census, we've talked to Kamau Shege and the Washington Census Alliance, and just the work they've done to bring coalitions together, to bring trusted advocates together, and to pass that message on. It's been really wonderful to see. So for me, my question is just really quick, and we can round robin, whoever wants to start, is if someone in the audience really wants to reach out to you and with a question or concern, I saw that someone asked for Andrés's email, and he just provided it on the chat. What's the easiest, best way to respond? Like, how can they reach you? And then how do you respond? Do you usually have someone on your team respond? Do you respond yourself, etc.? So anyone can pick up that question.
My team tag teams our email correspondence. So if anybody emails me at Girmay.Zahilay@kingcounty.gov, I think everybody should be able to see my name written right there. It's first.last@kingcounty.gov. I'll be able to get to it. And yeah, we tag team it because especially in 2020, 2021, we get thousands of emails a day. So we work our way through it.
I'll just say similarly, we tag team it at the department. We also don't have a TikTok account yet. We'll work on that together maybe as an outcome of this meeting, but through all the social media, I try to respond to as many emails as I get, as I can directly, but if not, we tag team it amongst the team.
And for us, you can go to jayapal.house.gov and there's a form and you can submit it that way. You can email us, you can call us. Our district number is 206-674-0040. Every single letter gets answered. We strive for 48 to 72 hours and our team is pretty amazing at doing that. And once a week, I write 3 to 5 personal handwritten letters to constituents that are just randomly picked. I love doing that. It's like a little way that we can get back to, just an actual handwritten letter and not just an email. So that's a really wonderful thing for me as well.
Wonderful. I appreciate those responses. Yeah. I look forward to the job descriptions. I'll come up on LinkedIn soon, where the government, city, county will be looking for TikTok social media experts to start their TikTok profiles. Awesome. I believe now Caitlin will look at some of the questions that have come in the Q&A and ask some of those.
Yeah, we have one so far, but don't be shy. Everyone else, please submit your questions either in the Q&A function or there in the chat. Either one works. We do have one question from Caroline Sayer. I'm probably mispronouncing her last name and I apologize for that. But she says, we ask government representatives a lot and I appreciate your efforts. I wonder though, can the government ask us to do more? She goes on to say that she co-hosts a garbage pickup group in Fremont. City of Seattle also picks up a lot of garbage. Why not activate other neighborhood groups to help with the effort? Kind of mentioning navigation teams in the city, but I guess wondering why not invite neighborhood folks to join in those efforts? And I guess, Andrés, since you're our city representative,
Sure.
maybe you want to start?
Well, I think what comes up in that question for me is the desire and ability for neighbors wanting to connect with neighbors, whether those neighbors be living in RVs or in apartments or in other homes and houses. And so one thing that we strive to do is to be able to empower residents to forge their own will as Seattle residents and give them the resources to do that. And so that would be a great example of either a kind of neighborhood garbage pickup or a meeting where we could work together in empowering you and giving you the needed resources to do something like that. So that's just one example of, we have our neighborhood matching fund. You can go to seattle.gov/neighborhoods as one form of funding for that. But there are others, and we can help you connect to the right funding mechanism to support something like that.
Caroline, your point is so spot on. I've found that there are so many people in our district and around King County that want so badly to help, and they're just looking for an avenue to do that. So we've been able to do a few different things to channel that goodwill and that energy towards something positive. We've organized GoFundMe's, and we're able to raise something like over $100,000 for Skyway residents who were displaced by a fire. We did another fundraiser to raise $50,000 for rental assistance for people living in public housing in South Seattle. We are currently organizing events to teach young people how to run for office. Not only young people, but people from underserved and disenfranchised communities. So yes, you're spot on, and we're going to keep doing more of that because there are a lot of people who want to help, and we need to provide them the platform to do that.
Yeah, we do a lot of that too, though we have to do it on the campaign side. We're ethically not allowed to do that on the official side. So on our campaign side, we're able to organize rallies like we did with community groups around saving healthcare at the beginning, you know, and pushing against the Trump healthcare bill that was going to strip healthcare away from people. We've raised money for different groups at different times. We've run different candidate forums, but all of that technically has to happen on the campaign side, not on the official side. I just want to make sure to clarify.
Same clarification for me before I get in trouble.
All right, thanks all for that. A couple questions just came in about our region's ongoing housing crisis. A lot of folks in the audience, I'm sure, are curious how they can help with that, how they can reach out to their neighbors who are living unhoused, either, I guess, through, you know, the direct level. There might be some nonprofits or organizations you know of that are doing that work that maybe have volunteer opportunities. But I'm sure folks are also interested to hear, you know, at the official kind of systemic level, what's the best way to have an impact there?
Well, I speak to this from the federal perspective. You know, one of the things that's happened is the federal government has really disinvested in a lot of the monies that are needed for localities to be able to invest in housing. And so really increasing what is in the federal trust fund for housing, the Housing Trust Fund, but also thinking about more innovative ways to address housing with a housing first model. So this is another bill that came directly from the community, My Housing is a Human Right Act, which really would dramatically increase funding over a period of 10 years so that it's not just a couple of years where you've got money and then you have no way to plan for the future, but actually some consistent, stable funding over a 10-year period, plus particular call outs for communities, whether it's LGBTQ communities, Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities, very specific communities that have immigrant communities that haven't had access to housing, and really building in the supportive services as well that are really required for a housing first supportive services model. So that came directly from the community, and we'd really appreciate advocacy on behalf of that bill when we get ready to introduce it again this year in Congress. And we hope that with the new Biden administration, Marcia Fudge as secretary, my former staffer, Ellie Kugler, who actually helped me write this bill, is now at the Department of Housing as well. So we have some real hope that we can increase the investment, but also the flexibility and take away the barriers that exist when localities and states try to get housing out to people who really need it.
I would just say that we have a great resource online from a local perspective around the very basics of how to even start a neighborhood group or a community group or get organized. I mean, some of the organizers 101, it's called the Community Resource Hub. It's on our website. And for those that can't access that, they're also in our community centers, in our libraries, and in several health centers around the city. And that is basically it gives you some foundational information of how to go about, putting together a meeting, a community group. We also have Seattle Together is an initiative for the Department of Neighborhoods in our partnership with our Office of Arts that really is looking at the basics of how to put together a Zoom call or a Microsoft Teams call if you want to use Microsoft Teams or something of that nature, so that you can start having those digital conversations as well. Knowing that particularly right now, a lot of our seniors are feeling very vulnerable and socially isolated. So there needs to be different ways how they can engage as well. So those are some of the things at the local level that we're constantly improving on to make sure that folks have the basics.
Yeah, everything my two colleagues just said. I would say there are things you can do on the immediate direct services side, and there are things you can do on the advocacy side. Immediate direct services, there are organizations that are out there doing great work in providing the continuum of housing that's needed to address our housing crisis, from shelter all the way through home ownership. And if you want a list of those organizations so you can chip in and support financially or support however you can, we're happy to provide a list for you if you shoot me an email. On the advocacy side, there is so much help that we need in changing so many different policies in King County to help build housing. It's hard to build housing because of construction costs, because of lack of public investment, because of zoning policies, because of NIMBYism. And you can use your voice, you can use your advocacy power, you can call your elected officials at every level of government, and you can make sure that we change all of those structural barriers to building the affordable housing that we need to house everyone in this region. And one thing that I see a lot is the NIMBYism portion is hard, because we're supposed to have a regional approach to housing, and everybody in our region, every municipality, all 39 cities and unincorporated areas need to, walk in lockstep in order to build what we need and to house the people that we need. But you have different areas doing their own thing, saying, we don't want this here, we don't want that here. And so if you're able to, use your voice, rally your community to say, yes, let's build the housing that we need. Yes, let's create the tax code that'll support the public investment that we need. Yes, let's change zoning policies and make sure our regulations are in favor of equitable development. Those are all things that would be really helpful.
Thank you so much for the responses to the question around how we can engage, especially around homelessness, which is, there's still even some more questions in the chat. And I welcome our panelists to take a look there and see if there's anything you want to respond to, either typed or live. But there is a great question here from, let me just find it. So an attendee asked, have you always wanted to be involved in government, and any fun student council stories? So if you're involved in student council, but I know, and I especially want to point this towards Girmay, that any advice for middle high school students who want to plot a path to office? And Girmay, I know that you have introduced something recently on social media about building the bench. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, you just pitched that to me. Okay, this is great. So I'm working to make running for office more accessible for various disenfranchised and underserved communities. My first workshop will be this Saturday from 12 to 1:30. The initiative is called Building the Bench in Washington State. And it's just to make sure that as we run for office, a lot of us, Congresswoman Jayapal, from communities that don't tend to be able to have that kind of access to government, we need to make sure we're looking back and creating a pipeline. So the first one will focus on underserved youth. So if you know any young people, whether they are in middle school, high school, early college, and they are underserved, however they define that, they're welcome to join this free workshop this Saturday, and I'll be doing one monthly, and hopefully I'll get to invite people on this panel to join me at one of those. But we're going to talk about storytelling, fundraising, creating a campaign roadmap, messaging. I'm excited to do that with anybody who wants to join.
Can I say on that one that we also have internships in our office, both on the official side and on the campaign side in DC and in Seattle. And now it's all virtual, a lot of it is virtual. So it's actually opened it up to people no matter where they are. And that's a really great way as well. And we've had depending on whether it's campaign or official. We've had high school students come and do internships. We've had college students come and do internships and be fellows. And so that's another great way to just sort of see what happens at the federal level. I know that exists at the state level too. And I bet Girmay is going to start something like this at the county level pretty soon, but there's these opportunities for high school students to come and actually serve as pages in the state Senate. So that's another way that people can get involved. And I'm really proud that when I left, I was the only woman of color in the state Senate when I was there. And when I left, I really made sure that I recruited another wonderful Latina woman to run and be state senator, Rebecca Saldana. And then after that really helped propel a number of others just by helping them to see, like, how do you do this? And plus, you know, when Girmay and I, and when Andrés, you know, when we're all in the positions we're in, it changes the way people see their futures. It's not really about us. It's just that people say, oh, somebody is there who's an immigrant, somebody who's there is Black, somebody who's there is Latina or South Asian. Maybe that means that I could be there too. And so that's been a real wonderful thing. And now we have, I think it's 4 South Asian American women in the state legislature since I left. And so it's been really amazing to watch women of color and folks of color in general joining bodies from the city council to county council to state legislature and up.
And I'll just add,
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I'll just add quickly, we have a great Seattle Youth Commission that I actually, way back when I first started government, the first assignment that I had is to staff the then Mayor's Youth Council, but just an ability for all youth in Seattle to come and engage in the community around their priorities, around whether it be, you know, wanting to run for elected office one day, or whether it be that they're passionate about climate change at their middle school or at their high school. So I would encourage folks to take a look at that. And then also we have our People's Academy for Community Engagement, the PACE program, which is really centered around bringing people in and helping them navigate through the advocacy of what does it mean to come and talk to the mayor, or talk to a city department, or talk to a council member about a housing policy, about land acquisition, things like that. So those are 2 programs that I just want to plug out there for youth.
And sorry to interject, Frank,
No,
but I
go
just
for it.
wanted to say that if everyone's scrambling to write down the names of all these great programs, just know that we're going to recap a lot of them in a newsletter later this month that'll be fully dedicated to civic engagement. If you're not already signed up for the Evergrey, you should do that, and I will drop a link in the chat.
And also reminding folks that we will be rebroadcasting this with our partners at Seattle Channel. And so you'll be able to rewatch this as well on Seattle Channel. So we thank them for their support. There is a question here I do want to ask, and I'm the worst at keeping track of time. So Caitlin, please let us know, or let me know. It's like, oh, we need to actually end it soon.
I think you're fine.
Okay. So the question from Rich Allen is a great question. And it's, how do you remain motivated and not get overwhelmed with all the negativity, the negative news, the negative, like, doom scrolling that people do? Like, how do you keep positive? How do you keep, well, maybe not positive. How do you stay motivated?
I can go. It's such a good question, and it's just a simple answer. It's by looking at all the examples that we even have, you know, the council member, the congresswoman here, but the leaders that are still, you know, in much worse shape in terms of the things that they are in the community, the things that they are facing than I am. And so for me to say I'm not going to be motivated when they're out there fighting for change in their communities, it's so, you know, it's a driver, it's a motivator. I look at my mentors of color in the city, in other city departments, and other at the state capitol, at the U.S. Congress, and that motivates me as well. But at the end of the day, what the big driver is, again, how I open the conversation, is that dedication to service, and just the small thing that you maybe don't think can impact somebody really has the biggest impact. And so those are the things that keep, at least, you know, me going in the work.
It's such a this job is a roller coaster of emotions the ups, the downs. It's pretty crazy. And that up and down on a bigger scale is mirrored by 2020. So in March of 2020, I still remember the day that the governor announced the shutdowns of small businesses and gathering and things like that. And in that same day, my email was just flooded by people saying, I'm going to lose my home because I got laid off. My small business that we've been building for generations is now going to go under and it's going to close down. My kid is out of school and I don't have a babysitter to watch him. What can I do? It felt like all at once the struggles and the hardships of an entire region were being channeled toward me all at once digitally. And that's really hard to deal with emotionally. And then at the same time, that same summer, I saw the largest movement in American history rise up, and I saw people helping each other, and I saw multiracial coalitions forming and demanding justice for our most vulnerable populations. And that kind of stuff really inspires me and motivates me and pushes me to play my role of channeling grassroots energy into legislation. So the answer of how do I stay motivated is just how many people that I see on the ground doing great work and feeling like I have a responsibility to play my role in advancing justice with people. But that does not mean that I'm perfect or that I don't struggle, because this job is really hard.
It's beautifully said from both of you. I think I'm an organizer. I'm a community organizer. That's my background. And what I have learned through years of advocating for immigration reform and, fighting to stop people from being deported, and then fighting for fast food workers alongside fast food workers for a $15 minimum wage. So many issues. I think what I've learned is that strength comes in times of crisis. And that as organizers, we understand that these big moments of crisis are actually opportunities to organize. That's how we ended up starting One America out of 9/11. I was elected on the same night that Donald Trump was elected. And the 4 years have been, so heartbreaking for so many families who have felt like they were completely thrown to the side, undermined, discriminated against, targeted, whatever words you want to use. And then, experiencing the January 6th insurrection, being trapped in the gallery, and ultimately, getting COVID from going to a secure lockdown room where Republicans refused to wear masks, but then going back to the floor to certify the elections, and to, certify Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as the president and vice president, because people turned out in a way that we have never seen before in the history of this country. We've never had that kind of turnout. And thinking back, and Andrés will remember this, thinking back to 10 years ago when I was leading a bus of, undocumented immigrants to Arizona to sleep on church basements and protest SB 1070. And people were just starting to talk about how they were going to build the political infrastructure in Arizona to turn the state blue. And there were all these people, including, some mainstream Democrats who were like, oh, Arizona's never going to turn blue. But look what happened. Arizona turned blue this year, and people turned out because they believe that the only way that we move that moral arc of the universe more quickly towards justice is with our own hands, by putting our own hands on that moral arc and pushing just a little bit more. So for anybody who thinks that their voice doesn't matter, there are so many examples of how a single voice, a single story, a single action has been the spark that really lit the fire for change to happen. And I'm just grateful that we have such an active, engaged community here in Seattle. And I'm so proud to represent it and to be with my colleagues who are doing such a phenomenal job as well.
Wow. Well, if you don't feel inspired after the end of our panelists' responses to that question, I don't know if you need an extra dose of caffeine in your morning coffee or your evening drink, but that was really wonderful responses. Thank you so much. I really appreciate and really quickly, I know we're wrapping up now, and I'll hand it off to Caitlin in a second. the power of government and the power of laws and policies is really, I think, a lot about, in my mind, is a framework of defense. How do we create safety nets? How do we create more equity? How do we make sure that everyone counts? But laws can't help. Laws do not force people to see each other as fully human, right? We can't force people to love one another. We can't force people to not see each other and feel fear or aggression or anxiety. And I think we need both, right? And that's the great thing about community work is not just about creating policies and passing laws, which are all incredibly important. And I'm glad that we're doing it, but it's also giving chance to actually break bread together, to see each other as fully human and know that there is a diversity and beauty in our differences, that we're actually, but still very connected as human beings. And that ability to see each other and love each other is something that I think a lot about as well, on top of the laws and the policies. So I appreciate our panelists as well, and I'll turn it over to Caitlin to close us out.
Yeah, I mean, what more can I add to that? But just thank you all for being here. Thanks to our panelists for their insightful comments and discussion. And thanks to our readers for and attendees for submitting some really insightful questions as well. We will have a replay of this webinar on our Facebook page tomorrow. So look for the Evergrey on Facebook, sign up for our newsletter, check out Civic Commons, and anything else I'm missing, Frank?
No, it sounds good. Thank you
Okay,
so much
have
for
a good
joining us,
night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night,
Bye.
everyone.